Welcome to Rise, Healer, Rise, the podcast where your transformative journey as a healer takes flight. We're here to guide you on a sacred path of embracing your essence and transforming your sensitivity into strength. Are you a healer, an empath, a creative soul, or a leader who has a deep desire to share your gifts and create an abundant life that honors the beauty of our earth? In a world that's calling out for healing, your unique gifts are more needed than ever. But how do healers, creative souls, and leaders of our new earth maintain their spiritual connection while navigating the material realm? The answer lies within you, and I believe in your power to rise up and navigate the challenges that lie ahead. The key to unlocking your full potential lies in sharing your healing tools, and just by doing this, you invoke divine right protection. Inside this podcast, we explore nature-based methods to clear trauma, cultivate sacred essence, and share your gifts to create a significant impact and thrive as a modern-day healer. Join me, Sara Estelle, your host, flower essence expert, high priestess and business guide, for content that soothes your soul and sparks inspiration. At full moon, we welcome a special guest to impart their wisdom. Together, we rise, heal and transform. So embrace your essence. Honor the abundance of Gaia. You are source. You are limitless. The world awaits your light. Rise, healer, rise. My guest today for this very first full moon Rise, Healer, Rise podcast is Kathleen Aspens. Kathleen is a deeply inspiring healer whose journey from a challenging upbringing to now supporting others with essences is nothing short of inspirational. Raised in an environment of fear and strict obedience, she found solace even as a child in the natural world. Her early struggles with self-worth and the constant pressure to conform led her to a deep exploration of nature-based spirituality and the healing power of flower essences. Kathleen's personal transformation through connecting with spirit and nature, alongside the profound grief and healing following the loss of her parents, has fueled her passion for helping others. With nearly 2 decades of experience, her work now focuses on using flower essences to aid in the healing process, not just for humans, but for animals too. In fact, it was one of her own animals that led her to essences in the first place, starting her on a deep life journey to heal herself and both humans and animals with essences. Kathleen's story is a testament to the power of healing from within and the transformative impact of embracing one's true self, making her a perfect guest for exploring how to help animals with essences on the Rise, Healer, Rise podcast. Okay, welcome Kathleen to the very first Rise, Healer, Rise full moon podcast. And I'm super happy that you're here with me. And we're going to be talking about essences for animals, healing all those little paws and all those little whiskers, and how amazing essences are for them. And
Thank you for having me on.
We were just chatting before we started recording that we have this mutual love for helping animals.
Yeah, it's something near and dear to both of our hearts, and I think probably a lot of your listeners as well have some furry or feathered creature in their life.
Absolutely. So I shared a little bit in the introduction how you amazingly and so inspirationally have shifted your life from something that was very challenging and difficult. It could have been a completely different outcome for you to something where you are whole, balanced, as much as we ever can be, and that nature has been your companion. And in this, you work with humans, but you also work with animals, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Can you
Yeah.
share with us where animals first found you and how you first started helping them with essences? It's probably a big question.
Yeah, it could be a very large answer or a very small answer. Let me see if I can try to find something kind of in between for us here today. As you mentioned in the intro, I grew up in a very difficult, dysfunctional life. I was born into a fundamentalist doomsday cult, and I think the biggest thing I can say about animals and nature is that that was the only sanity that I could experience. Because when you're in an environment where everyone is repressing and putting on a false face in order to please the hierarchy and to be obedient and try to be good all the time, try to be, do what's expected of you all the time, there's just constant. I don't even know how to explain it because when you're born into it, it's it's a little bit like fish. They don't know that they're wet. But nothing ever felt right. Everybody was always, as a sensitive child, as an empath, that I now know what, I thought it was me that was crazy, that couldn't get along, that couldn't fit in. But everybody was disjointed. Everything they said didn't match how they felt. And it's crazy making to be constantly exposed to that. And I only found a level of sanity and a level of peace in my nervous system when I was outside, when I was, hanging out with the trees and hanging out with the flowers and hanging out with animals, because animals are always telling the truth. No matter where they are, no matter what's going on in their life, they're going to be telling the truth. They have no investment in keeping up a face or pretending that something's different than it is. They are 100% in that moment and being truthful about where they are. And that is a profoundly restful place to be. And I think a lot of us are drawn to animals because they offer that, because they offer that, just like that full integrity all the way down to their little paws. They are always being truthful.
Mm. Mm. So that resonance, yeah, I mean, it's beautiful to hear you talk about it, but from what I've read as well, it's like you knew that resonance. Even then, you knew the resonance. And so you went for more of it. You filled yourself up and regulated yourself with it.
It took me many, many years to figure that out. But yes, intuitively,
Yeah.
that's what felt right, no matter what I was taught to believe. And, being taught to believe something that's not true is really damaging to your sense of self, to, any sort of any sense of well-being or any sense of internal value. I was taught that I wasn't worth anything. I was taught that my only value was in being obedient, to the authorities, and to be, to do what I was told, and to, shut up, basically. And that's all of the yearnings are sublimated there. Nobody is allowed to be themselves. They're so busy trying to be somebody else. And it's really soul sucking. And it is, pretty astonishing to realize later on, like, how incredibly damaging and problematic that is. And, thank God for nature, because otherwise I wouldn't be here.
Yeah. 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 We hear so many stories, don't we? And I know we're not allowed to say it in its kind of like on the surface meaning, but so many of us say, nature saved my life. And some of us really mean it. Many of us really mean it. Mm. And within that, also the animals come to save our lives, don't they? And that's what we're going to talk about, is that they have this kind of mission, if you like, as well, to come and help us. And by being in our lives, they reflect so much for us. And I know that's what we're going to kind of dive deep into as well. So essences came to find you. So, well, I know we're talking about animals here, but I'm curious, and I think other people will be as well. So, when did essences find you in all of this?
I think the very first time I, saw a glimmer of the essences was early in the 90s. I was working as a veterinary technician in a small animal and exotics practice. I've always been into animals, and that was just like a way that made sense. Like, okay, so go work with animals. And so I did that, and I love parrots particularly. And I had rescued a gray parrot, a young gray parrot. And when she hit puberty, which they do, there were some temperamental issues and some, little they're that's how they go. And so I was looking for something to help her. And I was at a gathering of bird people, and somebody had a little, like, photocopied sheet of Bach essences. I'm like, what is this thing? But I read a little bit about it, and I thought, this sounds great, because, I knew I didn't have guidance on, birds are very sensitive. They're very sensitive physically. They're very sensitive to smell. They're very sensitive to chemicals. You have to be really careful with them. And I didn't feel like it would be okay for me to be, playing around with herbs or essential oils, because I absolutely wouldn't want to harm my animal. And so when I read that these Bach flowers couldn't cause any harm, you use them diluted, there's no potential. It's like, great, let's give this a swing. And so I did. I used, I think particularly mustard for the hormonal mood swings. And I thought, wow, this is actually pretty amazing. And so I just kind of had that seed planted, like mustard seed gets planted. And then many, many years later, well, maybe not that many years later, but I started to really get interested in them and really get into what other things they could do, and using them with other animals. Being in a veterinary hospital environment, they weren't really too hip on a lot of the alternative stuff. I think nowadays maybe things are a little bit more open, but at the time it was, you didn't talk about it. So, it just took a few years for that seed to start sprouting, and I started to become even more interested in essences, and learning more about them. And, when I first really got activated about essences, and thought, I found a training, and I'm like, yes, this is what I'm going to do. This was years later in probably '06, '07. And I thought, I'm going to work with animals. That's all I'm going to do. I didn't want to deal with people, didn't really think that was what I wanted to do at all. But when I went through the training and I wanted to do my case studies, it made a lot of sense to work with people, because, animals don't fill out forms very well. You can do your case studies, but it's a little harder. And yet I discovered like how fabulous it was to work with people, and how much I enjoyed it, and how much people shifted and changed. And it was just so inspiring. And so ever since, my practice has really been quite evenly distributed, animals and people. And what really gets me excited is to work with the pair, is to work with the animal and the person, because so often the animal is bringing you to the essences. They
Yes.
know, and they're like, come on, go that way.
Mm. And that's fascinating to hear that it was actually the parrots that brought you to something that saved your life,
Yes.
and well, yeah, brought you into this fulfilled place where you're now really doing such a beautiful job of helping people, educating people. Yeah, so that's a really lovely story to hear. Really, really lovely. Thank you. I'm glad I asked that question. So the animals brought you to essences. I'm just trying to think in my life, maybe they did too. They've certainly there's been a big dance. I think it was actually me that brought me to essences just because I needed them so much, but who knows who was the prompter. Um, so yes, you had shared with me that you've worked with you work with probably the more domestic pets, but you've also worked with lots of other types of animals too.
Yeah, I had the great privilege of being part of a group of holistic practitioners working at a local zoo, a Bay Area zoo. And so for 5 years, we'd do monthly rounds with a small group of the keepers who were open and interested. And, we did it with the permission of the veterinary staff, of course. And it was just so interesting and such a cool experience to be able to do essences for giraffes and meerkats and vervet monkeys, and because they're so different. It's such a different environment to work with a wild animal as it is to work with a domestic animal. Most of my experience was, of course, with domestic animals and animals that were in a tight relationship with their people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, where you get the permission to work with them, is because, the person asked you and the animal gives permission, pretty easily, because, they want to be part of that. And oftentimes they've prompted their people to get into touch. But in a zoo situation, that's a different relationship. And so having to kind of go in a different way a little bit. And so when I make formulas for animals and for people, I do, once I've taken the case and gotten to know the individual a little bit, I get off the connection and do an attunement. And I'm not an animal communicator. I don't usually get information like an animal communicator does, but I get a good feel for what's going on and what's needed. And it was really interesting that I kind of came in with the assumption that I had permission to work with the animal, because the keeper had given permission, and I had to have a conversation with the animal a little bit, because there was a wall, like, who do you think you are? And that was really interesting. That was an interesting experience. One particular experience, and this is where it was really fun working with wild animals, because they're cared for by a group of keepers, and in many cases, most of the keepers were unaware of the flower essences, or, really, these animals are getting a lot of different therapies, from veterinary to, other therapies. And so a lot of them were unaware of the essences, or even that they were getting essences. And the keepers who didn't know were almost acting as the controls, because they would see changes in the animals and they didn't know that anything was happening. So it was really interesting to work with these animal groups, because they're always in a community and working with certain members of the community and seeing the entire community shift.
So am I understanding that you were treating one animal perhaps and the community shifted?
Mm-hmm. In one particular case that I can share with you, I was working with the troop of vervet monkeys, and there were probably a dozen members, maybe 15. And the problem was that the troop had become very dysfunctional. Normally, this type of monkey has a matriarchal society, and the senior females are, revered. And in this case, things had gone haywire, and the dominant female had attacked her mother and nearly killed her. And they were having all sorts of conflicts and fights within the group that, shouldn't have been going on. And so the keeper asked me to see what I could do. And what I did was I made essence formulas for the most dominant female and the most submissive female, and I think, two other just slightly down the hierarchy. And when those shifted, everybody shifted. You know, the dominants were no longer needing to beat up on the less dominant, and the submissives were able to go out and participate in the culture, in the group, without being hurt. And it was just astonishing, because, people saw it that didn't know that anything was happening.
So how beautiful. I'm setting the intention here that some people who work in these environments will listen to this, will hear this somehow, and learn how we can help all these animals. Yeah. It's lovely, beautiful stories. So you've talked a little bit about, well, you shared with us the amazing outcomes that can be had when we work with wild animals. And we had touched on as well working with essences with domestic animals, which is where most of us will find ourselves doing it, and how you have discovered, and it's certainly been part of my experience, is that the animal wants to heal everybody. Well, it's not that they want to heal everybody. Let me say it a different way. They usually come to us, and it's not just about healing them. They want to help us too.
Yeah, they're very invested in us. They care about us a lot. And I don't know that mostly it's an intentional thing, but it just kind of happens because they are in our environment. And so they do tend to absorb what's going on in their environment.
Mhm.
So one of the things that we can do to care for our animals is to care for ourselves. Let's not forget, let's change the whole environment, and we're part of that environment. Caring for ourselves, but also, caring for the actual space, because I think that we don't clear our spaces enough.
Yeah.
Using sprays, using essences in bowls of water, just as just a normal, day to day, we take a shower, we spritz the house kind of thing. I think that that should be part of our, household culture. I try to remember to do it pretty regularly because I think it does help to, clear some of that stuff that otherwise the animals might be absorbing just as from, laying in it.
Yeah, yeah. So probably it's the range of essences that's going to be of most service to everybody are the batch essences or Bach, depending on whatever we say. I tend to say batch, but other people say Bach. Um, so what essences could we put in a space clearing spray for our homes if somebody had access to the batch essences?
I too love to start there because they are the most well known, they are the most available. So it's really important to use what we can get. Rather than making something difficult for somebody to obtain. Starting off with Rescue Remedy. There is nothing wrong with using Rescue Remedy. It's, a lot of people have it around. I keep it in my cabinet. I keep it in my purse. I keep it, on myself all the time because it's just incredibly useful. So if you don't know what to use, go ahead and make up a little spray with some Rescue Remedy in it. And you can make, if you're using it in the moment and you're going to rinse out your bottle and wait for the next time. You don't need to use a preservative. So you could just simply put, a few drops per ounce, let's say, of water and just clean water and go ahead and just mist your house with that. And
Yeah.
then, don't hang on to that because it's not preserved. It's going to grow crud in the bottle. But just using that. Now, if you want to keep it for longer, you can use preservative, but it's just a really good, simple starting point for changing things. I would think about rock water. Rock water was the first environmental essence, and I use a lot of environmental essences in my practice. And if you look at the description of rock water, you might think, that doesn't really make sense in the context of what I want. Rock water talks about inflexibility of mind or inflexibility of emotions. And yet, if you think about the action of a spring, it's water emerging out of the earth, fresh, clean, beautiful, vibrant water. What cleans better than water? It's the universal solvent, right? Maybe not universal, but it dissolves these stuck emotions. So it's a beautiful thing to add to a spray to just get things moving, just to get the energy moving. And then you could use, if one more, I'll throw one more in, cherry plum. Cherry plum is such an important essence in my practice. It helps with these, it helps with extremes of emotion of it, it helps us to settle into our hearts. In the general description of the Bach remedies, and I'll say Bach just because I'm an American, um, uh, it talks about, extreme worries that you're going to lose your mind. And for me, that's a high level of anxiety. You can see it in animals that are terrified of going in enclosed spaces or being on a leash, or just sort of just kind of general anxiety, cherry plum is such a beautiful remedy for helping to soothe those anxieties, to help calm it down and bring the energy back down into your body.
Yeah,
I could go on and on, but those are some really good starting places, let's say.
I love those. Yeah. Wouldn't it be cool to have vets? You know, they have those little things of disinfectant or whatever, I don't know, antibacterial. Wouldn't it be amazing to have some cherry plum or some rescue remedy in that? Because certainly we have had cats in the last 10 years or so who are so terrified of the vets. So terrified. Literally.
It is, yeah,
They
it is frightening.
hyperventilate ridiculously. And essences don't completely mop it up, but even the vets go, well, that made a difference, didn't it?
Yeah. And that's what we're working on, is we're working on this sliding scale. The magic wand, I don't have one. Do you? I would use it if I did. But what reality is that we want to improve things. We're looking to sort of slide that dimmer switch over to like calmer and more stable and more present. Flipping a switch, it happens sometimes, but don't count on that. What we're really trying to do is working within the realm of like, let's just see if we can just move that over a little bit. And that's an important way to support the animals, is to start working with the essences before their anxiety is super high. And same thing for us, I mean, like when you're up in the stratosphere, it's really hard to pull you down out of there. So start working ahead of time. Start working when you start making the appointment. Start giving some essences in their water when you make the appointment, and support them all the way through that, so that they can stay more present and stable and calmer. And, even if it's 10% calmer, that's a lot. That counts.
Absolutely, it does. Yeah, it's very visible because, as you say, there's animals can't hide it. What you see is what you get. You know, they're telling the truth. So you will always see the difference really easily. Yeah, so that's a really beautiful tip for people just to use essences, get some rescue remedy happening. And I don't know if you've noticed, Kathleen, in the last 6 months or so, I personally at home, but I've also heard this from clients, rescue remedy is really an essence that's coming into its own right now. It's just working more than it's worked before. I don't know quite whether that's really true, what I'm saying, but so many people are saying, oh, well, I thought I needed something more complicated, or I needed to do the thing. No, just use your rescue remedy. Even for those of us who've been doing it for like eons, it's working.
Yeah, there is something to that. We do kind of, once we learn a little bit more about essences, we're kind of like, oh yeah, that's beginner stuff. But it's not. It's actually really, I kind of dislike using the word powerful, because it brings a different mode. We're not trying to overpower things. We're trying to support them to feel better and to heal. So it's very gentle, but it makes a really big impact. So
Yeah,
yeah, I agree. I think that we can forget about the incredible gift that Dr. Bach made, which he created that formula. That was the first combination formula. He knew what he was doing.
yeah. So yeah, and people can access that in most places. It's really good. So if people are listening and who have animals, and I'm sure there will be lots of them, we can come to somebody like you for support. And we can also, maybe, which is what most of us do to start with, is just like, okay, well, maybe I could do something myself. Maybe I could start shifting it for myself. Where would we begin? I know, again, that's a huge question without a sort of case in point, but maybe you could share with us two or three essences that you've found that work really well for animals. You've already mentioned cherry plum.
Mhm. Yeah, I think, beginning, the Bach essences are really a helpful place to start. And a lot of my interest is in, like you say, supporting people to work with these things on their own, to see what they can do. They don't, sometimes a professional is really helpful when an animal is deeply traumatized, or when you're working with a rescue animal who's had a lot of baggage and a lot to work through. And sometimes that's happening because you also have a lot of stuff that maybe you can work through too. And I cannot tell you the number of times that I've been on the phone with a client and talking about some of the essences that I'm recommending. And, I say, Mimulus is really helpful for developing a sense of courage, emotional courage, to try things that maybe feel a little scary or a little bit awkward or whatever. And, this is for an animal who's maybe afraid to drive in the car or who is really concerned about going to the vet. So let's try some Mimulus. And I just can't tell you how many times the client will be like, oh, those sound like something I should take too. And I, of course, sort of like, yeah, yeah. Okay, great. All right, let's open that door a little wider. And let's talk about taking them together. Because so often when I recommend an essence for an animal, it would be really great for their person to take it too. So if we were talking about someone who had an animal who is like, let's just put an example about a kitty who is afraid to go to the vet. Let's talk about some essences for that. So we'd be talking about maybe rock rose, which is a very helpful essence for that deep anxiety of just that terror, that gut liquefying terror that we feel that we're about to die. And they don't know what's going on. They get stuffed in a crate and, taken in a car, and that's terrifying for most cats. So we'd also put in some cherry plum in there to help them settle their nervous system down and to help settle their mind so that they can process. Because when you're in a high fear state, you're just reacting. You can't think. You can't think, oh yeah, I think I've been here before and I lived last time, so maybe I'll be okay this time too. So those are two good starting places. Aspen is also really great for the terror of the noises and the things that you can't see. And I know for me, this is kind of like when you go to the dentist and they put you in the chair and they're always coming at you from behind, and there's always these noises that you can't quite see the origin of, and you kind of feel your nervous system sort of spiking up a little bit. And animals have that experience all the time, but they don't know, they can't just walk out. We could walk out if we really, really wanted to. And so those would be three that I'd start with. And then if somebody was saying, oh, yeah, I have some of these same things too, I would say, yes, please take these essences also. Take them with your animal. Open up that bottle, give yourself 2 drops and give them 2 drops. And that's just an exact, 2 to 4 drops. It's all good, whatever works. Now, if you have concerns, and a lot of people do, and this is totally legit, about using something with the brandy preservative, there are lots of ways that you can preserve the essences without needing to use alcohol. I do like to use alcohol preservative depending on the case, because what you can also do with it is put it on your hands and pet it onto their coat. Introducing it into their field is just as effective as putting it in their mouth. So sometimes that's a really good way to kind of get them into both nervous systems, because you put it on your hand and then you're going to pet it onto your animal, and you are both having this really nice bonding experience. So that would be a starting place. I mean, do you have a second for me to tell you one little story about a client and her animal? This one was a case where this was a big protection dog, a mastiff, and she came to me wanting to work with something of her mastiff, being overwhelmed and being overstressed outside the house, because this dog was bred to protect and take care of his family. And he would get, really overwhelmed and stressed out when he couldn't control things. And so, working with some essences, I expect cherry plum was part of this, and probably oak, I think, too. But that's not the essential part, is that when the bottle got to her, She went to give the essences to the dog and, put them on a cookie or, there's a bunch of different ways that you can give it, but put it on a cookie and handed it to him and he wouldn't take it. And that's really unusual. Like I've never really had that happen before, and she checked to see, it's like the cookie that he doesn't like. And it was literally the essences on the cookie. And so she tried putting it in water. He wouldn't touch it. She tried putting it in his food. He wouldn't touch it. It was like he was really determined not to take these essences. I thought, wow, that is a really interesting thing. I don't think I've ever had that happen before. And I said, so what if you took some essences yourself in front of him? Go ahead and sit down with him, tell him what you're doing, take the essence bottle and take a few drops into your mouth, and then give some to him. And then he was willing to take them. And the next time I talked to her, then he was totally fine as long as she was taking them too. And the next time I talked to her, I said, so how's it going with these essences? And she says, I'm not really sure because she didn't come to me for her stuff. She's, I'm not really sure, but I like cried for 3 days solid after I started taking the essences, and now I feel a lot better.
Wow.
But that dog took care of her. That dog insisted that she take those essences too. He knew. I didn't know. She didn't come for herself. That dog knew she needed those essences.
Yeah. So it's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that. And so it kind of brings us to what we were talking about at the beginning about how animals mirror our emotions as a kind of service. It's what they naturally do. They don't, read a book and then go, oh, I'll go and do this. That's just how they operate in the world. Yeah. And so I remember, and it's what you said this at the beginning as well. I remember listening to Steve Johnson, the late Steve Johnson, years ago in a training. And I was kind of at the beginning of my essence journey, and he was saying Steve loved animals. I used to treat just animals, but I don't anymore. Now I only treat the family. And I can remember thinking, well, that's not very nice, is it? And there was this kind of thing came up in my system. And years later, I was like, I get this. And of course, you would still help the animals. It's not about neglecting them, but the best work can be done when everybody gets to work together. Just like those beautiful monkeys. We get to work the community. Mm.
And isn't that how we can, you know, so often when I'm working with people, human clients, they feel a little guilty sometimes. They've been trained to feel a little guilty for doing something for themselves. And but if we are becoming in better alignment, if we are working with our own stuff and carrying like a higher vibration or carrying more of our soul energy out into the world and not hiding it and not having it buried under all these layers of stress and strain and trauma, we are actually catalyzing everyone we interact with. We are actually making a difference in the world. So just like with those monkeys, like you only have to work with a few and then everybody, it ripples outward and everybody does better and everybody feels better. So it's not a selfish act to take care of yourself. You're actually doing something really valuable for the community, for your
Mm.
family, for the world. Yeah.
Yeah, and animals can do that as well. I know from animals that I've worked with and just shared little stories. And these animals, when their stories get shared in whatever way, just because people love to talk about their animals and how they've helped them, these animals inspire people because they've been courageous. And so it's just a beautiful, beautiful journey.
Yeah. And I really do think that they bring us more into ourselves. So many of us animal people really do start out wanting to help animals. And we can have these, I know I did, a big blind spot to all the stuff I'm bringing into it. And they're so generous and they're so patient. We don't have to be perfect before we can help them, but they sure do appreciate when we are working our own process while we're working with them.
Yeah, yeah, it makes their lives a whole lot easier on many levels. Yeah, well, what a beautiful conversation, Kathleen. Thank you. I've learned a lot myself, or been reminded of a lot myself. I think I'm going to make up a mister with some rock water.
It's a beautiful essence that just doesn't get used enough.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So I know, well, you've already shared that you work with animals, and you have, like me, you have a big passion for educating, and you have a beautiful flower essence school. You have your own flower essence podcast, which we'll flag up in the show notes as well. But you also have a course all about essences and animals, or dogs, I think.
Yes. The school is floweressencestudies.com, and you can find a variety of courses and offerings there. Feel free to pop on and check it out. We do have, if you join the email list, we have some quick start guides that are super handy and easy to use. We do also have the Bach Flower Learning Program, which is a gift from Julian Barnard that we host on our site. And it's beautifully organized, and you can use it as a reference guide. It is such a great resource that I like to let everybody know about. And it is completely free. And it's incredibly in depth. So it's a really great resource if you're interested in learning more about the Bach flowers. And you can find my course for dogs. It's called Canine Care. It's Bach Flowers for Dogs. And in the course, I walk you through every one of the Bach essences and how they can be applied to dogs, or if they are more human remedies, then I'll talk about, for the pet carer. I also have in the course sort of a bonus that is a little bit like a consultation with me if you had a rescue dog, that I walk you through some additional essences that I use for rescue dogs with the specific needs and challenges that they bring. So it's intended to be a course that can be used by anybody at any level, from someone who's just getting started with essences to somebody who knows a little bit more and wants to go a little deeper.
Sounds amazing. Sounds amazing. Yeah.
So
Thank you.
check it out.
Yeah, I hope lots of people go and look at all of the resources, because it's our shared passion, isn't it, to just let as many people know about this beautiful, beautiful modality of essences, and how much a tiny bit of knowledge can change a whole load of stuff.
Yeah, you don't have to learn everything. You can learn just a couple things and just kind of keep it in your pocket. Some of us do really feel like we need to know everything, and yeah, I'm certainly one of those people. But you can do a lot with just a little bit. If you just sort of remember rescue remedy, animals, boom, and have one around, you can do a lot of good.
Yeah, you can. Absolutely. Especially in this crazy world. Thank you so much. Thank you so
Thank you
much
so
for
much.
joining us, Kathleen, and sharing all those lovely stories. I will remember those monkeys, and I'll remember that mastiff and how he helped his owner.
Thank you for having me on. It's been really a pleasure and a privilege to talk to you, and, happy full moon.
Full moon blessings. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I want to remind you that your journey is a sacred one. You are not alone on this path of transformation. I, Sara Estelle, and all of the Nature Kingdom are here with you, holding space for your growth and celebrating each step you take towards embracing your true essence. If you love today's content, leave us a review on your favorite podcast listening platform and share your biggest takeaway. And do visit the show notes of this episode, where you'll find extra resources to support you. Also, come and join our Rise Healer Rise community on Facebook and be part of a rising wave of healers who are empowered change makers. And make sure you subscribe to this podcast and never miss an episode. Thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Until then, may you always remember, you are the healer the world has been waiting for. Rise, healer, rise.